The wedding guests were sipping champagne. The music had paused, and just as the pastor was about to pronounce them husband and wife, she walked in, calm, dressed in white, but her eyes, those eyes carried blood. She looked directly at her groom and smiled. You could hear the wind stall in that moment, every breath held, every glance frozen. The groom's face, once proud, now drained white, like someone had pulled the life right out of him. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Not that day. Because just 6 hours earlier, in a quiet back room meant for peace and makeup touch-ups, she opened the wrong door. A door that would shatter her world forever. She wasn't supposed to see it. But she did. Her groom, on his knees, between the legs of her own sister. She stood there frozen, mascara wand still in hand. Her veil hadn't even been pinned yet, and in that moment, something inside her cracked. But she didn't scream, she didn't cry, she just backed away and said nothing. Until now. So she did the unthinkable. She fixed her dress, smiled for the pictures, walked down that aisle, and waited for the exact moment to destroy everything. Before we dive in, drop your location in the comments. We want to see where our real ones are watching from. And if you love stories that twist your gut and grip your heart, hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Ariana was 28, fiercely loyal. The kind of woman who never asked for help because she'd spent her whole life being the helper. Raised by a single father who worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, she learned early on what sacrifice looked like. She practically raised her younger sister, Betrayal, changing diapers at 10, walking her to school at 14, covering for her mistakes by 17. If Ariana was the rock, Betrayal was the wave. Soft, unpredictable, beautiful, and always crashing into someone else's world. Dorian, Ariana's fiancé, was the kind of man people noticed. 30 years old, polished in every way, shoes always shined, laugh always measured. He came from a family that wore wealth like perfume. Quiet but overwhelming. From the outside, it looked perfect. Ariana had finally found a man who saw her worth, who chose her, who made her feel like she was no longer just surviving, but finally living. Her father approved. Even Betrayal smiled for the engagement photos. The wedding was everything Ariana had dreamed. A vineyard in Virginia, golden hour light, and rows of white chairs stretching beneath willow trees. Guests flew in from all over, old college friends, distant cousins, high school teachers who still remembered the girl who used to stay late and clean up the art room. This was supposed to be her moment, for once just hers. But there were signs, late-night texts Dorian brushed off, the way Betrayal laughed a little too loud at his jokes, how his hand lingered on her shoulder for just a second too long. Ariana noticed. She just didn't want to believe. She had spent her life giving. She didn't want to lose something that finally felt like hers. She thought she was marrying the love of her life. But love, real love, doesn't whisper in the dark with your sister behind closed doors. The morning of the wedding began with quiet chaos. Ariana woke early, before the sun had fully stretched over the vineyard hills. She had barely slept the night before, too nervous to eat, too excited to cry. Her vows were tucked into her purse, handwritten on soft linen paper, with a little ink smudge near the word always. She had practiced them in front of the mirror a dozen times, but none of it felt real until she heard the makeup team setting up downstairs. Today, she was becoming a wife. But by 8 a.m., something felt off. Betrayal wasn't in her room. One of the stylists mentioned it casually. Has anyone seen the maid of honor? Ariana brushed it off at first. Betrayal was always the last one to show up, late to birthdays, to flights, even to their father's funeral. But still, it tugged at Ariana's gut. Dorian wasn't helping. He was pacing outside on the phone, his forehead pinched in a way she'd only seen once before, at his mother's wake. He kept saying it was just business, that he'd be ready by noon. Ariana was doing her best to stay grounded. 1 more hour and she'd have her hair done. 2 more and she'd be stepping into the dress, 3 more, and she'd be walking toward forever. But there was one last thing she needed. Her veil. It had been delivered the night before and left upstairs in the guest house where the bridal party had stored their extra bags, so she slipped away, unnoticed. No shoes, just soft footsteps and a silk robe. The hallway was silent, that kind of stillness that feels too loud. The door at the end wasn't closed all the way, just cracked, like someone had forgotten or maybe didn't care to pull it shut. Ariana hesitated. She could hear the faint hum of wind outside, the soft creak of wood beneath her as she moved closer, and then a sound, not a thump, not a crash, but moaning. Familiar voices, one low, one breathy, then words, whispers. Faster! Time stopped. She reached for the doorknob, slowly, almost gently, and when she pushed it open, it was like walking into her own funeral. There, in the center of the room, in the same bed where she and Dorian had once talked about baby names and dreamed about honeymoon beaches, was her groom and her sister, their bodies tangled like strangers. Her veil, her actual wedding veil, crumpled on the floor. She didn't scream. She didn't step back. She just stared, long enough for them to notice, long enough to see the look on her face, long enough for regret to settle in. Then she turned and walked out. Ariana didn't speak. She didn't yell. She didn't even shut the door. She backed away slowly, each step like dragging a suitcase full of bricks. She made it down the stairs, out the back door, and across the gravel path, unnoticed. No one saw the trembling in her hands. No one saw the way she kept blinking, as if trying to unsee what had just been burned into her memory. She didn't grab her phone. She didn't grab her dress. She just grabbed her car keys. And she drove. Past the gate, past the vineyard, past everything she had planned for the last year. She kept driving until the trees got taller and the houses disappeared. Until she found the overlook, the one she used to visit in college when she needed space to breathe. She parked the car, turned off the engine, and just sat there, still. Then came the shaking. Then the kind of cry that doesn't make a sound, just clenched teeth and trembling lungs. Her hands gripped the steering wheel like it could hold her together. And then the scream. Loud, raw, broken. A scream no one heard. But she needed it. She needed to let it out somewhere safe, somewhere quiet, because what she saw wasn't just betrayal. It was a lifetime falling apart in a single image. She saw Brielle's face, not the woman in the bed but the little girl she used to braid hair for, the sister she held during thunderstorms, the child she stood in front of at school when bullies got too loud, and Dorian. He wasn't just her fiancé. He was the man who walked into her life during one of her darkest seasons, when her father had a stroke, when she lost her job, when she thought maybe she was just meant to be alone. He had held her hand through all of it, promised to never be like the others. But now, how long had they been doing this? Was the wedding just a show? Were the I love yous just scripts? Did everyone know except her? Had she been the only one still believing this was real? She looked down at the vows in her purse. Folded, safe, meaningless, and she realized she had no idea who either of them really were. She sat in silence for almost an hour, just watching the sky shift. The sun was climbing, but everything inside her was still dark. Then, with hands still trembling, Ariana reached for her phone. She didn't call her mother. She didn't call a bridesmaid. She called Kennedy, her best friend, her lawyer. The one person who had seen her shattered and still called her a masterpiece. Kennedy answered on the first ring. "Are you okay?" A pause, then Ariana's voice, flat, sharp. "I just walked in on Dorian and Brielle." Another pause, but Kennedy didn't gasp, didn't panic, just said, "Then you're still walking down that aisle, and we're going to make it a moment no one will ever forget." It sounded insane, but something about it clicked. Ariana didn't want to run. She wanted them to feel what she felt, not later, not in private, in front of everyone who thought this was the perfect love story. She drove back, past the trees, past the gate, back to the vineyard. Her dress was still where she left it. Her bridesmaids were still fussing over lip gloss and centerpieces. No one noticed she had been gone. No one asked where she had been. She went to the bridal suite, looked in the mirror, and fixed her makeup. No tears, no redness, just eyeliner sharp enough to cut glass. Then she opened her purse, pulled out the vows, read them. One last time. The line that said, "I promise to protect your heart," made her stomach twist. She took a pen, scratched it out, and wrote something new. Her voice shook only once while writing it. Then she folded the paper, tucked it neatly back into the envelope, and stood. Before leaving the room, she found the videographer, looked him in the eyes, and said calmly, "Keep the cameras rolling, no matter what. I want every second captured." He nodded, confused, but obeyed. Outside, guests were already gathering. Dorian was by the altar, looking handsome, composed, like nothing had happened. Betrayal was now at Ariana's side, holding her bouquet, whispering compliments, like her mouth hadn't just betrayed the same lips her sister was about to kiss. But Ariana just smiled, walked, stood tall. She would give them a show they'd never forget. The sun dipped lower behind the vineyard hills, casting golden light across the perfectly lined chairs and flower petals scattered down the aisle. Every seat was filled. Guests whispered to each other, fanning themselves with printed programs, complimenting Ariana's taste, the floral arrangements, the soft live music, the elegance of it all. No one knew what was coming. Dorian stood at the altar, hands clasped in front of him. From a distance, he looked like the picture of composure. But closer, you'd see it. The way his thumb rubbed against his palm, the subtle clench in his jaw, the occasional glance toward the guest house where, just hours earlier, he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. Betrayal was now in place too, standing just off to the side in her bridesmaid gown, bouquet shaking ever so slightly in her grip. She kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, blinking a little too often. She smiled at people who made eye contact, but the smile was hollow, shallow, rehearsed. Ariana hadn't spoken to her since returning. No questions were asked, no answers offered. It was as if the betrayal had never happened, as if everything was normal. Then the music changed. A hush moved across the vineyard like a breeze. The doors opened, and there she was, Ariana, dressed in ivory silk that caught the light just right. Her veil framed her face delicately, not a single hair out of place. She looked angelic, serene. But if you looked closely, her eyes told another story. Her steps were measured, graceful, deliberate. The kind of walk that didn't ask for attention, it demanded it. People stood. Some wiped away tears. Kennedy, seated near the front, didn't blink once. Dorian smiled when he saw her, but it faded. There was something in her expression, something unreadable. He whispered as she approached the altar, "You look perfect." Ariana tilted her head slightly, as if acknowledging the compliment, but didn't reply. Instead, she turned toward the pastor, folded her hands, and waited. The ceremony began. The pastor spoke gently about love, about the joining of two souls, about family. Dorian nodded along. He looked at Ariana when prompted, smiled at guests. Everything was going to plan. Then came the vows. Dorian went first. He reached into his jacket and unfolded a neatly typed note. His voice shook slightly as he began, but he found his rhythm quickly. He spoke about falling in love with Ariana's strength, about how she brought peace to his chaos. He called her his anchor, his safe place, his future. People smiled. Betrayal bit her bottom lip and blinked hard. When he finished, the pastor turned to Ariana. She took a deep breath, pulled out a small piece of paper from her bouquet, and began to read. Her voice was calm, controlled, but sharp enough to pierce glass. "Some say marriage is about trust," she began, but I've learned trust is a dangerous game when played with snakes." The words hung in the air like smoke. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. A couple exchanged glances. Dorian's smile faltered. Brielle's lips parted slightly, her chest rising and falling faster now. The pastor tried to regain the rhythm, nodding politely and proceeding. "Ariana, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" A long pause. Then Ariana spoke. "I do," she said slowly, "but not in the way you think." Confusion rippled through the audience. One woman chuckled nervously. Someone cleared their throat. Dorian turned toward her, whispering her name, but Ariana held up her hand gently, signaling silence. Then she turned. She faced the guests. Her voice did not rise, but it didn't need to. "Before I say I do, I need to show you something first." There was movement behind her. The screen lit up. The projector, positioned discreetly near the floral arch, flickered to life. At first, guests assumed it was a montage, maybe a video tribute. Childhood photos, engagement clips. They leaned forward, smiling. Then the footage began, static. Then a doorway, a hallway, a soft creak, the inside of a guest room, a bed, then movement. 2 people, tangled sheets, moaning, no faces yet. Then Brielle's voice, then Dorian's, then everything. Gasps filled the air. Someone covered their child's eyes. An older man cursed under his breath. A bridesmaid whispered, "Oh my God." The pastor froze. Dorian lunged toward the projector, but Kennedy had already stood up and blocked his path. Brielle stumbled back, dropping her bouquet. Her face drained of color. She looked around, as if trying to find an exit that didn't exist. "Ariana?" She never flinched. She stood there, eyes on the crowd, her face unreadable, letting the truth speak louder than her pain, letting the silence say everything she didn't need to. She wasn't just exposing an affair. She was reclaiming her voice. The video recording ended. No music, no fade-out, just the final frame frozen in the air like a confession too big for words. For the first time in all her day, the wind stopped moving, and for the first time in her life, Ariana didn't feel anything. The wedding hall, beautiful just moments ago, was now suspended in absolute silence, until it wasn't. A single guest gasped, then another. The sound multiplied like wildfire. Whispers, shrieks, chairs scraping the floor. The room unraveled. One woman cried out, "That's her sister!" Another whispered, "That's the groom? That's today?" An older man stood up slowly, shaking his head, muttering, "This ain't real. This can't be real." And in the middle of it all, frozen like stone, stood Dorian, the groom, his face drained of every ounce of color, hands trembling, jaw clenched. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He just stood there, paralyzed, staring at the now black projector screen like a man who had just watched his entire legacy disintegrate. His tuxedo looked tighter. His chest heaved slightly. There were no words. Because what could he say? That it was a mistake? That it wasn't what it looked like? That it didn't mean anything? Even he knew those lies wouldn't land anymore. A few feet away, the maid of honor, his mistress and Ariana's only sister, was already backing away. Her hands shook as she grabbed the edge of the podium to balance herself. Then she bolted, but she didn't get far. Kennedy, Ariana's best friend since college, and the lawyer who knew where every skeleton was buried, was already standing by the exit. She didn't speak. She didn't raise her voice. She simply took one step forward and said firmly, "You don't get to run, Brielle. Not after this." The 2 sisters locked eyes for the first time since that morning, and in that moment it became painfully clear. This wasn't just about a secret. It was about a lifetime of betrayal finally coming to light. Ariana stood still. She hadn't cried. She hadn't screamed. She simply turned to the crowd and said, "You wanted my spotlight. Now you have it." The pastor, unsure what to do, glanced nervously between them all. A bridesmaid sat down and quietly wept. One of the videographers lowered his camera, stunned. The planner's assistant whispered into her headset, "What do we do?" And all around them, the audience, their friends, their families, their co-workers, were left blinking through the wreckage of what should have been a wedding. But this wasn't a wedding anymore. It was a reckoning. Ariana took a long breath, walked over to the wedding planner and spoke calmly, like she was placing an order at a restaurant. "Cancel the reception." The planner's eyes widened. "All of it?" Ariana nodded, but she wasn't done. She looked the planner square in the eye and added, "But don't cancel the payment. I want every dollar I spent transferred to a shelter for women, preferably ones who've loved men who lied." The planner was speechless, the guests were stunned, and Brielle, still frozen near the door, had nothing to say, because there was nothing left to say. That evening, Ariana walked away from the vineyard wearing the same dress she had arrived in. But she wasn't the same woman. Her hair was still pinned, her veil still flowed. But something about her posture had changed, straighter, quieter, sharper. This wasn't heartbreak. This wasn't even anger. This was resurrection. Because what Ariana had lost that day was not a groom, not even a sister. She had lost the version of herself who accepted betrayal disguised as love. The version who swallowed hurt so others wouldn't choke on guilt. The version who believed silence was strength. This wasn't just betrayal, she would later say. This was erasure. Of every sacrifice she made to raise Brielle like her own child. Of every hug she gave when their mother didn't. Of every late-night ride, every bailout, every holiday gift wrapped in love she never got back. It was the erasure of her loyalty to Dorian, of all the times she picked him over herself, of how she held him down when he was broke, how she cheered him on when the world turned its back. They took her love, twisted it, mocked it, and dared to smile at her altar. But Ariana didn't seek revenge with fire or fists. She used silence, grace, and one perfectly timed truth. She gave them a wedding, just not the one they expected. And as she drove away that night, no ring on her finger, no party behind her, she smiled for the first time in months, because finally, she chose herself. The fallout didn't end at the altar. It started there, because while the guests went home in stunned silence, the internet was just waking up. By midnight, the clip had already hit Twitter. By morning, it was everywhere. Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, TikTok edits with dramatic piano in the background. News blogs picked it up. Celebrity gossip pages reposted it. Bride exposes cheating groom at wedding trended globally. Ariana deserved. Better climbed to over 3 million mentions in 24 hours. People didn't just watch. They devoured it. Women called it cathartic. Men called it terrifying. Comment sections turned into therapy rooms. Stitch videos featured therapists, pastors, ex-wives, and divorce lawyers breaking it all down. Everyone had an opinion, but almost no one defended Dorian. Because the evidence wasn't hearsay, it was cinematic, it was calculated, and it was true. Dorian's carefully polished business image, clean-cut, charming, trustworthy, collapsed overnight. A multi-million-dollar real estate deal fell through within 48 hours. Partners backed out. Clients ghosted him. His name had become a brand of humiliation. As for Brielle, her influencer brand, based on elegance, femininity, and family-first values, was scorched to ash. Sponsorships pulled out. Follower count nosedived. Even her comments were locked by morning. And Ariana? She didn't post the video herself. She didn't have to. The world did it for her. But she didn't disappear either. For once, she let the spotlight find her. News channels reached out. Daytime talk shows begged for interviews. Magazines offered full-page spreads. Women's groups flooded her inbox with letters of support. Her job line lit up with new opportunities, some of them from people who once doubted her worth. But for Ariana, none of that mattered. The views, the validation, the headlines, they weren't the point. She sat down days later, away from the noise, in front of one camera. Just one. No glam, no script. And said the only thing that really needed saying, "I didn't do it to ruin them, I did it to reclaim me." Because for too long, she'd let other people write her story. Dorian, Brielle, even the silence in between, but not anymore. The wedding was never her ending. It was her introduction. To herself, to the world, to a version of womanhood that didn't apologize for setting the record straight. She didn't stay. Not in that city, not in that pain, not in the shadow of what was done to her. Ariana packed the last of her things into 2 suitcases, one for clothes, the other for dreams she'd put on hold, and she left. Quietly. No announcement, no goodbye party, no dramatic exit. She moved to Seattle, a place where no one knew her as the girl from the wedding, where the air smelled like rain and fresh starts, where the silence wasn't heavy, it was healing. There she started over, not to prove anything to anyone, but to finally live for herself. She launched her own wellness brand, not one built on aesthetics, but on truth. She called it Homegrown Grace, a line of teas, bath oils, and handmade journals, each one crafted with purpose, born from pain and rooted in peace. Women bought them not just for the products, but because they trusted the hands that made them, hands that had been broken and kept creating anyway. Ariana began baking again, like she used to when love was simple, not for a man, not for a sister, just for herself. She'd play music in her kitchen, old soul records that reminded her of childhood. And sometimes, when no one was looking, she danced, clumsy, free, joyful, like someone who'd remembered her own rhythm after forgetting it for years. And love? She didn't chase it anymore. She didn't beg it to stay. She didn't hand over her worth in exchange for temporary warmth. She let love find her if it dared to show up whole. Because Ariana had learned something the hard way. Some storms don't come to destroy you. They come to wash away the liars. And when the sky clears, you don't rebuild what you had, you build something better. If this story hit you the way it hit us, tap that like button and subscribe, so YouTube knows you want more stories like this. And tell us in the comments, if you were Ariana, what would you have done?